Hi, I'm Scott at ediblemusic.com. If you're just getting started using FL Studio, I assume you've got a few musical ideas going on. So I want to help you get started using the workstation and how to work with samples, MIDI and virtual instruments, and how to record instruments and your voice through your musical interface. Come on in. The first thing I want to help you get familiar with is the workflow that FL Studio gives you. You'll start from the browser, which contains all of your plugins, your virtual instruments, and your effects and processing that you would add to the project. This is a big cupboard of all of the stuff that you would make use of. And then you would draw upon that and place it into your project. Samples, your loops, your virtual instruments, and you'll add them to the channel rack here. And by the way, all of these windows are modular. You can expand or minimize them. Very useful to keep yourself organized. But you'll place all of those things into the channel rack. So the channel rack is quite important here. And I'll show you by building a drum set here. Let's add a 707 as our kick. We'll find a snare drum as well. Let's use the Lin one. We'll fill it out with some claps and some hats. Now we have a drum kit and you can program in all the drum patterns that you might want to make use of. We'll build one here. Try that. Maybe on the one again. And then what I'm doing here is I'm just left clicking to add a beat, and you can right click to remove it as well. Let's hear how that sounds so far. You can see by the different colors here, it goes in bars. There's 4 beats, 4 beats, 4 beats, and so on. And you can expand it if you want to make a longer drum pattern. And I'm feeling a little chill today, so let's slow the tempo down. Up on the top here, you can see I'm slowing it down. You can also type in. And you can also click and drag or right click and drag to remove. So those hats are a little bit loud. So if you give your attention to these dials here, the left is panning and the right is volume. So we'll just turn that down. Let's finish it out with some claps as well. Great, so you've got your first pattern made. What you will do then is, having drawn the sounds from your cupboard of effects in your browser into the channel rack, you would then have this list of patterns on your playlist. And what you can do is you can clone a pattern and modify it as well if you want to. So let's say if I wanted to add another snare. Then you would have 2 different patterns. And as you can see, each of these patterns is making use of the same elements on the channel rack. So the channel rack is quite important. It's going to contain all of the elements that you might make use of in your program. And then you would decide using the different patterns that you would make how to arrange and place them. So we might place the pattern, the first pattern we made here, let's have it repeat a couple of times. And then perhaps you might want to just make a new pattern, say for a breakdown. It'll still contain those instruments. However, it won't contain any of the information that we had previously programmed in as we did when we cloned it. So let's say we just want to have a 4 on the floor little breakdown here. Then you can add that. Cool. And if you want to preview what you've got so far, you can change the playback mode from pattern to song. On pattern, it will just review for you the pattern that you have selected. If you move to the song, then it will show you how it sounds in the playlist so far. Let's make this a little bit more sensible. So I'll have 4 repeats of that first pattern. And all I'm doing here is I'm clicking and dragging, similar to how I was clicking and right-clicking here on the channel rack to add or remove notes. You can left-click or right-click to add or remove patterns. So we've come from the browser into the channel rack. We've used these sounds to build patterns and added them to our playlist. From the playlist, the sounds will then travel through the mixer. And here, as I'm playing back the song now, you can see on the mixer window here at the bottom that all the sounds are being routed to one track. What you might want to do is to have each sound routed to individual tracks. And to do that, you would select that from your channel rack. So we'll send our kick, our snare, our clap, and our hi-hat each to different tracks, and now you'll see that they come through. So while you can adjust the volume on the channel rack itself, you can also adjust the volume in the mixer window. A few other features that you want to make use of on the channel track are the swing. So you'll notice it'll shift a bit as I change this. You can change it a lot too. But it's always nice to add just a little bit, because when you're programming drums, you might not want the drums to be exactly on the grid. You might want to have a little bit of groove. So adding a touch of swing here can be really useful. The graph editor is where you can adjust some of the values. And you can see I've got the kick selected here so it matches each of the notes that are being played. And maybe if we want to just adjust the velocity of these faster kick hits. Then you can do that. So again, the channel rack is going to be a lot of use for you. Let's talk about using some instruments now that we've got some drums going. A really fun one to use is Flex, and what we'll do is we'll record it onto a spare track. So on track mode, this is where you would choose either from, if it's unassigned, then that's how you can just drop your patterns in. If it's an audio track, we'll talk about audio tracks in a moment. when you're recording your voice or an instrument. But for now, we're going to use a virtual instrument called Flex. And we will record right into the song, onto the playlist. And if you double click, it will bring you to the piano roll. You can see that I wasn't very good at playing. So you can either right click to delete, and then you can draw it back in again. That piano rack out of the way. Maybe that would sound good on the breakdown. Now you've got drums, you've got a virtual instrument. You can also add some samples and manipulate them if you want to fit them into your song too. So FL Studio comes with a whole bunch that you can make use of. Let's find maybe a riser or some sound effects. That's pretty cool. So we'll add that. Maybe that will lead us into the breakdown. Now, because this sample doesn't quite fit into the track, you can stretch it and shorten it. And I'm using the grid as a guide here. Let's try that. Yeah. Turn that down too. Cool. So 3 ways to add some sounds to your project. Now I'll show you how to record yourself or an instrument that you might be using. Let's do that on a new track. On track mode, as you saw earlier, you would select audio track, and we'll send this to track 8. Choose your input. We'll choose input 1. And every so often, FL Studio will ask you these just confirmation windows, and that's no problem. So now you can see that my voice is coming through. And it'll count us in. And now I can record my voice here. You can see the waveform coming up. So when you're recording either your voice or instruments straight into your interface, that's pretty much all you've got to do. You just have to make sure to check that your input is properly selected and that recording is armed, and then you can go straight into it. Now, I think that this workflow will resonate with you if you are the kind of songwriter who is a builder. If you think about your songs in sections, then it would make sense to you to draw upon these pools of resources, to build patterns and sections, and then to situate them in relation to each other as you build out the song. I think that that kind of workflow would be really useful for you if you were to use FL Studio that way. And to help you manage that workflow, you'll make use of the menu bars up here. On the top left are your program-related options and menus, and you can also add instruments from here if you are looking for them there. Then next to that is the playback. Then next to that is the playback settings. You can add a metronome. You can scrub through the song position, set your tempo, arm your recording, and you can also add these settings for how you want to input your sounds and how you want the program to help you input your sounds. For example, here's a countdown that you can arm in addition to your metronome. You can specify whether you want to use your MIDI keyboard or your computer keyboard. Then next to that, on the right here are where you can access all of your windows. So let's say if you were to accidentally close your playlist or your channel rack, then you can open your playlist again, or your piano roll, or any other that you might have lost. You haven't actually lost them. And as I've been running through this quick start, you've probably noticed that as I mouse over anything, in this window here on the very far left, it'll show you a bit of an explanation about what that does. That's really useful to pay attention to because it also shows you some of the keyboard shortcuts that you'll want to learn as you're getting more familiar with the program. But the most important one that you really should make use of is F1. Anytime you have clicked anything, let's say if I were to press or have the metronome highlighted, anything that you can see on screen, if you press F1, it will open up the manual for FL Studio on that entry specifically. So if there's something that you're not really familiar with on the screen, then just press F1 and it'll automatically take you to the manual entry for that. Honestly, I wish that all applications everywhere had that kind of function because it's really useful, especially for a workstation, because there's a lot of stuff happening in workstations that can feel a little bit complicated. But again, I think that once you get familiar with this workflow where you're drawing upon the browser and then adding into your channel rack, then going through the playlist and into the mixer, you'll find that the workflow feels pretty nice and smooth, and it helps you to keep on making progress on the song that you're making. Furthermore, right-clicking on some items will sometimes give you a context menu, but some will also have some functionality. So if I were to right-click on the playlist icon on the toolbar, then that will maximize that window for me. And if I were to left-click on it now, that will close it. Very useful. And once you've got your song made, FL Studio also includes a lot of effects, which you would add to the individual channels in these effects slots. You can see that it includes delays, reverbs, distortion, compressors, everything that you would need to mix a song. And to help you get started with your mixing practice, I want to offer you the 5-Day Foundation series that I designed, which goes you through step by step, using EQ to adjust the tone of program elements, using compression to solidify them or to increase some of the dynamic interest in the song, then also adding some delay and some reverb. It goes through this whole process for you. So as you've got your song going and you're ready to mix, I want you to make use of that. You can find it at ediblemusic.com/5days. See you there.